For new research supervisors, I think it's worth thinking about planning ahead. Often when you're supervising PhD students, and particularly more than one student, you end up with bottlenecks of work just because of the nature that we often now take students in at the same time of year. It means that they're also getting to the same stages at the same time of year, so you might end up with an awful lot of chapters to feed back on, or even the final thesis to feed back on at the same time as another student is wanting you to feed back on their thesis. So I think these bottlenecks can appear in your workload, and so planning ahead can be a really useful tool.
We don't often think about passion. We don't talk enough about passion in the university. Try and develop a passion for the subject matter that your student is studying. Try to make it something that you care about, something that you may be reading around about, something that when you see it in the literature, or perhaps you see something in the news that is relevant to your student, you tell them. You actually get involved, actively involved, really wanting, if you like, that student to feel your commitment to the subject matter, okay? And in a way you can't instruct someone to do that, but that's my advice, to try and do that, to really want to care about the subject matter of your student.
For a new research supervisor in our school, I'd say the one thing to think about is to adapt your approach in PhD supervision to each individual student, because they all have completely different personalities and different ways of working.
For a new supervisor, one of the things that they will encounter is frustration. They have got to their position because they are extremely good. They're better than many other people. And you will not get PhD students who are all of that quality. It just doesn't happen. So be prepared to be frustrated. Most of your PhD students will not be as capable as you were. And you have to live with that and deal with that and recognise that that's the case.
Remember that the student is finding their way as much as you are. Be respectful. Remember that at the end of the day, the student will be the expert in the subject that they're studying, not you. You might know a bit about it, but at the end of the day, the student will know far more about it than you do. Try to keep to some sort of structure so that you're seeing and receiving pieces of work intermittently, and that there is a time scale on it, because I think sometimes a PhD of 3 years can seem an awfully long time at year one, but actually it's not a very long time, and if you're doing master's students, it's even less. So I think it's a combination of all of those things that produces a good supervisor in the end.
As supervisors at Glasgow, we're not on our own. We typically have a co-supervisor, and what I think I've really enjoyed is supervising students where you're working with another supervisor who brings a different set of skills and different insights, and that I think is when you see your different perspectives coming together and the student emerging as sort of the product of these different insights, it's where you see sort of science emerging that wouldn't be possible on your own.
I really cringe when I see screaming supervisors. I've experienced it once or twice, and I've heard legendary stories about screaming supervisors, and I just feel it's completely counterproductive, because all it does is it alienates your students. They won't communicate with you if there's a problem, so you might not hear about a problem for 6 months until it's a disaster, frankly, until your student leaves you. So I think don't be that person. But equally, if you're too friendly with the student, some of them may try and take the opportunity to walk all over you. You shouldn't be doing all the work for them. So for example, I encourage my students to write papers. Now, first attempt will often be a disaster, but it's their first attempt. That can then be corrected and shaped, but they feel ownership and they put the hard work in. They went through the heartache. I think as far as writing is concerned, you should try and develop the skills of proofreading. Proofreading is not taking a piece of text and turning it into what you would write. Proofreading is taking a piece of text, making it easy to read, make it scientific to read, but maintaining the structure and ideas that the student put in there in the first place. They should own these things, and they don't want to feel that you're taking it off them.
Just really, in starting out, I think it's important to draw as far as you can on the advice and guidance of more experienced colleagues. And I know that we, as a as a group, and you know, I think it's standard practice across the school and indeed the university to have joint supervision, and that, you know, helps you on your way to the point where you're able to take on lead supervisory roles.
Make sure that your student begins to write as soon as possible. I would say don't constrain them to the first proposal that they've come up with for their dissertation. Give them the opportunity to read more widely and come up with a more sophisticated approach. I would also say to them that most students come up with proposals that are impossible, that they're often more wide-ranging than they can be, and one of the challenges is to hone down the topic for the dissertation to something that is doable.
Be confident in your own ideas as a supervisor. I think earlier on in my research supervision career, I would have sort of deflected to senior people who maybe didn't know the project as well and maybe provide general advice, but typically I found that my own gut feeling about the project and about the ideas I had were actually pretty spot on. So I try and have a bit of faith in your own ability to address these kind of supervisory questions.
There are a number of things that I might suggest. Firstly, organisation, and I think this is now just part of the way the university runs, insists that PhD supervision is run quite sensibly, is that new supervisor will work with a more experienced supervisor. So there'll be a co-supervisory relationship. But what I would say to the new supervisor is absolutely don't take a back seat. You need to be immediately, proactively involved in the supervision, making suggestions, not simply waiting for the lead supervisor to take the lead, the first supervisor, more experienced supervisor to take the lead, but you jump in there and start actively supervising.